The Indian aviation sector is going through testing times. Go First became the second airline in 4 years to ground operations, while SpiceJet is also struggling with default on lease rental payments, while lessors are taking airline to NCLT. Why is the sector primed to drive economic growth in a flux? What are the realistic chances of Go First returning to skies again? Should lenders adopt a more flexible approach towards bleeding airlines? All that and more will be discussed in this bulletin. I'm joined in the studio by Bharat Kumar, Associate Partner, Saikrishna Associates, who is also a specialist in dispute resolution and litigation. Also joining me at this point in time is Mark Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Consulting, and my colleague Soumalya Santikari. Gentlemen, appreciate you all taking time out. I want to come to you directly, Bharat, with a pointed question, and that is with respect to SpiceJet, we saw NCLT is saying we are going to hear the lessor's plea on 1st of June. But with the entire process around Go First bankruptcy, where exactly is the bankruptcy process headed? Are we going to see a Jet 2.0 repeat itself?
So, at the outset, I would want to segregate the episode of probably a Jet Airways and a SpiceJet with Go First. And the reason being because Go First has a history. And the history is that P&W, of course, they're engine manufacturers, they, if I can say that, they kind of defaulted on their spare parts delivery, their engine deliveries and so on and so forth. There were multiple other deliveries also, pursuant to which Go First, which was to expect. Now, why I'm saying this is because this is a long thing. For the past 1.5 years, they've been having issues with P&W supplying substandard engines, substandard parts. So, ultimately, they filed, Go First filed an arbitration in the Singapore International Arbitration Center, that is a SIAC, we'll call it SIAC. And they won over there. There were 2 awards, that is 2 judgments which were given. One, I believe, in May on March 30th and one on April 25th, if I'm not wrong. And on both occasions, they were told to give the the proper engines, the proper parts to Go First. That means Go First won. Issues which came in were that during this time, they did not comply with whatever was there in the award. So, on the other hand, you obviously as an airline, as a responsible airline, you would not want your flyers to fly in probably spare parts or something which has there is some issue with that. That is absolutely is. So, how I see it is, unlike other issues, unlike other airlines, probably even a Kingfisher, Go First possibly manage their finances well. This issue and the aviation sector in total, because aviation sector requires a lot of, it's very cost extensive, and my friend over here can explain that further. But I personally feel this is the reason why they went into insolvency in the first place. I still feel that this put together, because I believe Go First has also filed something in the American courts for compliance of the arbitration award. And I believe they can be flying, they should be flying soon.
All right, so they could be flying soon, but for Jet, SpiceJet, it appears that they will have to wait, because NCLT says we are going to hear lessor's plea. It was supposed to hear it today. It is saying we're going to reserve the plea. We'll hear it once again on 1st of June. So a big cloud of doubt hanging on the operations of SpiceJet for now.
I believe so, yes, because SpiceJet, of course, there were other issues also. I mean, to be extremely honest, the history behind SpiceJet and their bankruptcy is, I would want to dwell further into it. But their issues pertain to a lot of monetary defaults and several other issues which are internal to them. That's what is privy to me by details which are there online and available. But even if that be the case, even if SpiceJet does go into insolvency, I would suggest that let's just wait and see as to how things pan out, because there are several stages to an insolvency process.
That is correct.
It could be that once even if it's admitted and the moratorium does come into play under Section 12 of the Insolvency Act, it could be that they could settle it. It could be that they could raise funds from somewhere. So let's see how it pans out, and then we'll take it further from there.
All right, because SpiceJet, and I want to get you here, Martin, thanks very much for taking time out. I understand that SpiceJet says our operations will continue. We do not want to go into insolvency. We have enough cash in hand to run our operations without really, going for a formal IBC process. Lessors are saying the promises made to us have not been rewarded. We've not got our payments back on the lease rentals, and so therefore it's best for SpiceJet to go into insolvency. There is a deadlock there, but run us through quickly after Go First, because we'll talk about Go First in just a while. What lies ahead for SpiceJet?
Well, thanks for having me, and great to be here. The premise of where SpiceJet is that in the history of what we know as our second aviation bull run, SpiceJet is the only airline that's been in and out of bankruptcy for nearly 9 times. They've always had somebody to bail them out, to give them a second lease on life, and we've seen it. We've seen it with when they got into a partnership with the Marans and the Tatas, and then Wilbur Ross and so on. The key point it's pretty valid to mention here is that SpiceJet is in clear default. As Bharat said rightly, the difference between a Go Air and a SpiceJet is established default, and SpiceJet has been defaulting on lease rentals for the last 10 years, ever since they started and ever since they structured their operations and in the position that they're in. The challenge which emerges with SpiceJet is they're being taken to court by their operational creditors, the lessors and the debtors, and their banks and so on. And you only take somebody to court in this country when there is an established record and there's evidence of default. So I think the magic word here is default. Usually an airline would never want to be in default. I've run 3 airlines in my career. I know that we usually make payments and we say, hey, hold on a second, I'm going to send you something to tide you over, and don't take your aircraft back. Lessors also, lessors don't want to take an aircraft back from an airline because they know that there are ups and downs and they want to stay invested because you've signed a 5 or 7 year long-term leasing contract, right? So nobody wants to break the contract and get out just because you're missing someone is not paying you a couple of months lease rental. So one usually takes that option and you restructure and you pay bit by bit. But the problem with SpiceJet is they've abused that level of trust with the lessor. With the lessor would allow you 3 months to pay up, they would hold it back for 6 or 12 and so on. And they've gotten themselves into this position which is self-inflicted. The difference between a SpiceJet and any other low-cost airline is SpiceJet has painted itself into a corner. And now enough is enough. The buck stops here. Lessors, banks, even SR Techniques, which is a Swiss maintenance company, even they've taken them to court and they're pretty much clear that they're going to see it through. So the major difference is of a SpiceJet and a Go Air is that Go Air is voluntary. Go Air stepped up and said, all right, we owe you guys some money, and we're going to come to a settlement, but we need a second lease of life. We need to get this airline back flying because our situation and predicament is not because of what is us, it's because of Pratt & Whitney. That engine has been breaking and failing, and even the DGCA has had grounded all Pratt & Whitney engines. We've seen emergency landings, air turnbacks, we've seen diversions, and this problem with Pratt & Whitney affecting airlines is not just in India. It's you have United Airlines, Lufthansa, Turkish Airlines, JetBlue, Swiss International Airlines, you've got Hong Kong Express, ANA Japan. The list is endless of airlines that have been pretty much, have got a rough and they've been shafted by PW. And I think clearly now the focus shifts on accountability. Pratt & Whitney needs to get up and, before we see a major event or a crash or an air disaster, we need to get up and hold Pratt & Whitney accountable, whether that's in the Singapore arbitration court, whether that's in Delaware, whether that's with ICAO, whether that's in the US. We're not sure, but somebody needs to take those steps and push those buttons.
Absolutely. And an interesting word is voluntary here. That's in right. This case, and we focus on that is because in Go First's case, they voluntarily went to NCLT saying, we want the process to start, we want a moratorium. But in this case, in case of SpiceJet, it's the lessors who are dragging SpiceJet. Right. So interesting dichotomy there, if you look at it, two very contrasting situations where in one case, lessors went to NCLT, right. I'm talking about Go First, challenging the NCLT order for a full moratorium because they wanted to get the aircrafts back into their possession. In case of SpiceJet, they're saying, allow us to repossess our aircrafts. Please declare, SpiceJet insolvent so we can at least get some money back.
That's right.
And I want to bring in Shomolo on that. Shomolo, who's been tracking aviation sector closely. Shomolo, you know, the contrast here is not lost at all. And devil lies in the detail. And the word voluntary, I think, is the word that underpins the entire operations between the two airlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Mark said, that the Go First management, they realized that there's no point pushing the button anymore. I mean, they needed that. They realized that if they delay it further, as we had seen in the case of Jet, where if Mr. Naresh Goyal had at some point of time realized that it would be better to let go of the airline and then take the lenders, and then we would have seen Jet flying up and running again. But that delay caused a lot of problems, and as we see today, Jet's revival is under a dark cloud. And in this case also, SpiceJet also battling with the lessors to ensure that the airline also is the, I mean, as Mark rightly said, that it's seen a lot in its 18-year-old journey, and it's a survivor, SpiceJet, and for Indian consumers, Indian flyers' sake, for the stakeholders' sake, for the Indian aviation story, it is important that both Go First and SpiceJet survive, because as we see, two vibrant carriers in a country like India is not enough, and the entire bankruptcy process, I think Bharat will be able to shed more light on this, whether how can we ensure that it does not stretch for too long, so that the lenders, the most important jigsaw puzzle in this case, they are not frustrated or exhausted, and they take their hands off the sector as a whole. So Bharat, if you can shed some light on that.
And just to add to that, you know, because after lessors went to, and I'm specifically talking about Go First now, after lessors went to NCLT and the NCLT orders their dismissing lessors' plea, asking them to go back to NCLT in case they want some sort of relief, talk to the management at Go First, try and work out a deal. That is, of course, was the suggestion made by NCLT. We don't know whether that's going to work out or not, but interesting and important, because lessors in a sense are also losing faith from what AWG, the Aviation Working Group, and its comments made around lessors and airline players or aviation players in India, is that lessors are losing faith in aviation story, in the Indian aviation story. Now, we don't know if there's too much merit to that statement, but they also downgraded India's rating. All of that does not really augur well for us in the long run. We have big aviation dreams in this country. So to begin with Go First specifically, how do you sort of reckon with the NCLT order? What do you make of it? And what is the future of lessors, specifically with Go First? We don't know when they are going to resume operations, if at all.
So I'll tell you why I'm hopeful about it is because I'll tell you the whole process that happens. Whenever a plea is filed, ultimately with the NCLT, when they hear it, they pass an order saying whether there can be a moratorium or not. And then, of course, there are 5 types of creditors. To elaborate on that further, as it come through even during the arguments, over here it's voluntary. The other 2 options which are there are an operational creditor files it, or alternatively operational creditor, of course, there is another way of doing it. You'll give a notice and then eventually you'll file it. If you'll be participating in that. As a financial creditor in probably SpiceJet's case, this is when dues are not being paid. In Go First's case, on the other hand, why I feel there's still light at the end of the tunnel is because you still have probably a 30-day window. What happens is, once the moratorium comes into play, there is a COC which comes in. There is a committee of creditors. They then sit and decide as to how this can be taken forward. To put it simply, then how can we look into the assets? Then they look into all other things, all the accounts and so on and so forth. Now, it's during this period, if Go First could probably get something on board, probably something in terms of an order from the Delaware US court, saying that you give us these engines, probably they could get a little bit of capital infusion. So I still feel this can work out. This is not exactly how, it's not a SpiceJet is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Okay. Martin, you know, there is, of course, increasing discussion about Go First coming back. We don't know when that's going to happen, but DGCA is also hoping to go and, do a mandatory check into its operations. What is the future looking like for Go First? Do you think it's going to come back anytime soon?
So where we are, I think the focus of even NCLT's order and the way things have been panning out before the bankruptcy court is that the whole intent is to not let Go Air go under. The basic premise is to keep them afloat, keep them alive, give them that second lease of life and come back. Because the bigger impact of this is that India is one of the largest aviation markets in the world, and you know, our traveler base is amongst, you know, we are the fastest growing. So clearly having a Go Air go down just when India enters its peak summer holidays season is going to be disastrous, because other airlines are clearly going to milk everyone and jack the price of tickets to be at least 30 or 40% more. As you rightly pointed out, you know, the lessors are not only getting wary of India, lessors are starting to get more and more, you know, while you lose faith, you also start increasing your deposits. So those collective elements which are pretty much all worked in, and this actually started from Kingfisher Airlines in 2012. So as far as Go Air's restarting, I think it's going to take a bit more time. I would like to predict this to be somewhere around June 15th, near around June 15th. I don't think it may, you know, May 27 or even May 30th is going to work out for them, but they will come back.
You don't think that's a doable deadline of May 30th? Because we know, you know, they were hoping to resume operation post May 26th, which is just tomorrow. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So your assumption is around June 15th.
That's right. It's going to take a little more time, because by the time DGCA completes its audit, by the time the fuelers start getting back into cash and carry, airport companies and ground handlers start working on per flight cost deals, then they'll have to restart their booking engine, get back to all the third party travel agents and start selling tickets. It's going to take a bit more time, and I think they're being a bit too aggressive by talking about 27.
Okay, because from what we know, DGCA is conducting an audit that is according to an internal mail which was sent within 4 Go First employees before approving resumption of flights. They are hoping to conduct an audit as to how prepared Go First is to take back to airs. And before we move on to the larger growth story, the Indian aviation story, I want to quickly get you in, Bharat, on the Pratt & Whitney engines, what Go First has been blaming so far for its financial crisis, for its inability to take back to skies. You know, Pratt & Whitney has not really kept up its promise. Has the Singapore arbitration reward that came in favor of Go First has not been followed through by Pratt & Whitney so far. Of course, Delaware court is going to look into the matter. We don't know how soon or how late that is going to be. But as far as, you know, the relationship between Go First and Pratt & Whitney is concerned, how do you see that panning forward? Allegations, counter allegations coming in. We don't know who's right. We don't know who's wrong. Pratt & Whitney says we are going to look at our customers, because Pratt & Whitney has other customers as well in India, including Indigo, one after the other. And we are obviously, you know, meeting the deadlines as fast as we can. So both sides giving their opinion, giving their analysis. But how do you see the relationship panning forward? Go First cannot think of resuming operation without Pratt & Whitney engines.
That's right. How I see it is that, we'll just go back a little, and the award also, when it came through, they had promised that they'll supply a certain bit of engines, let's say 10. They did not do that. There was another award which came in. This was after 15 days. They did not comply with that. Now, what's going on in the US courts is nothing but an execution. If I can say that in simple words, it's to make sure that those they comply with those awards.
And they honor the award.
Exactly. So over here, Pratt & Whitney doesn't have a choice. They have to comply with it. The issue is, if they don't do it fast, it becomes counterproductive for Go Air. So their business relationship is something which, of course, depends on their reliability, because ultimately Indigo, if I'm not wrong, my friend can comment further on this, Indigo, if they also, like somewhere in between, they changed it from Pratt & Whitney to some other engine manufacturer. So this is something which I believe Go Air would be looking into it, and eventually when they start operations, they're looking at other engine manufacturers also. But at the outset, they would want that these should be compliant, at least they should take their aircraft onto the air. So let's see how fast the Delaware court can give an order regarding that. And let's be hopeful about it.
Okay.
But Bharat, I just want to ask, I mean, you know, for a low-cost carrier like Go First, I mean, obviously Indigo, given its size and profit and its bottom line, obviously they can have some part of its fleet grounded. But what about low-cost carriers across the globe? Don't you think that, as Mark said, the Pratt & Whitney needs to be held accountable at some stage? Who holds them, and what kind of compensation are we looking at?
You are absolutely right, Shubhalu, when you mentioned that, and that's also one of the reasons why I said that like Go First they've been held liable. So an arbitration is equivalent to an court order. What happens is in an arbitration, illustratively, you and I get into an agreement. There's a dispute. We mentioned that we'll go for arbitration, and that's like an alternative to a court dispute. So if I can put it in simpler words, they've been told to comply with it twice, and then they've gone to the US court to say they're not complying with it. So I'm saying they don't have an option over it. They have to comply.
So what my fear is, in a capital intensive business like aviation, I mean, the longer it gets, the more less chances of survival for an airline. And Mark would also like to, I would like to know from him. So we've seen instances in the past that the longer it gets, obviously lenders also, they need to also take a view of the fact that aviation is a unique business in this case, and also they need to take haircuts more than other businesses. So in this case, I want to understand, with the airline landing up in bankruptcy, how can the lenders also adopt an approach where they can ensure the employees, the entire stakeholders, the entire sector is up and running and not through these turbulent phases?
So, the moment you start flying, remember, you only take off when you have paid passengers sitting in the back of your aircraft. So that means they've bought the tickets. Right. The key to bringing back an airline is you have to help them restart. Now, the smartest thing they did was go to the NCLT, and they've actually, as Bharat pointed out rightly, the COC will sit, the debt will be brought into play, they'll decide who gets paid what, if the company has to be declared insolvent, or should the company continue, or should the airline continue to fly, and then we start paying back the operation creditors and so on. So the situation at the moment, everything focuses on rightfully for them to start operations, and I don't think the lessons will really take a haircut.
I'd like to come in here and maybe ask, what's the role of aviation regulator in this case? What's the role of Civil Aviation Ministry? Because we saw Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia come on record a day after Go First declared that it will not be resuming operations anytime soon, saying we are going to look into the matter. What exactly can they do? Can they speak to Pratt & Whitney? Is it a pure commercial relationship, or can the government also intervene at this point?
Absolutely well brought up, because this is a Pratt & Whitney versus India issue. It's not just an Indigo and a Go Air who are affected. You and I are affected. The common man is affected. Travelers are affected. Families are affected in their summer holiday planning. And because India has these unreliable engines from Pratt & Whitney, our aviation sector and our environment here is deeply affected. And this is something which the government has to take up on a very aggressive basis with Pratt & Whitney. So far what we've seen is shooting from the hip, illogical reactions. When Go Air shut down, if you remember, DGCA issued a show cause notice to Go Air. I mean, shouldn't the DGCA issue a show cause notice to Pratt & Whitney demanding why are your engines breaking and failing in India? Why are blades separating, and why is there metal crack?
But I assume, and not to defend DGCA here, but I assume, and from my understanding and reading of it, the notice issued to Go First was as to why they did not apprise the authority on time before saying that we are halting operations.
That's right, because usually what happens is that's when you're pained to a point where you have to shut down to keep yourself alive. And we've never seen that in the history of this country. Never has an airline voluntarily said, you know what, I'm filing what's equal to a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This has happened extremely well in the US. Post 9/11, when United Airlines filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, they actually restructured their debt and they emerged much stronger. Today, United Airlines is one of the largest airlines in the world with over 750 aircraft in their fleet. So the steps are in the right direction. And as you rightly brought up, those steps need to be backed with the DGCA and the Ministry of Civil Aviation Machinery. After nearly 3 weeks, our minister comes up and actually says Pratt & Whitney should be made accountable, and I think that's a good step. And so does the DGCA. The DGCA also has to, in some way, change its Turumkan attitude and realign to being more as a facilitator, because you can't always be policing, you got to be policing. And that's the most relevant part about where we are today, is because everybody charge and attack an airline, but when their chips are down, you got to help them come up, because you got, the country is losing out on GST payments,
Absolutely.
VAT. Oil companies are going to sell lesser fuel. Airports are going to see lesser revenue. Airport ecosystems, hotels, car rentals, the Ubers, the Olas, everyone's going to suffer, right?
Absolutely.
So the whole idea is aviation is a rainmaker. There's no doubt about it.
And it's in everybody's benefit for GoFirst to resume operations. Right. And I want to bring in some numbers here, just to paint a picture of where the aviation story is heading from here. India handled, or the aviation industry rather, handled 200 million passengers in the financial year 2023 that ended in April. And as of March, a record 13 million passengers took to domestic flights to fly within the country. At a time where a country as robust in India, like India, where the aviation sector is only growing, where more and more people are coming back to airports, we have crossed the COVID levels. At a time like that, it is important and pertinent for there to be fair competition, and I don't have my colleague Karthik here, but he's of the opinion, or he rather argued this morning, that it's also pertinent, important to have aviation players that are doing well as opposed to have multiple aviation players. My question to you is, it is in everybody's benefit to have multiple players who are also doing well.
That's right. That's right. No, and the key to any vibrant aviation environment is the more airlines you have, the more choice. The consumer wins. From where we were 4 years ago, Akasa shows up out of nowhere right post-pandemic. And that move was smart, because you knew that post-pandemic, you've locked people up for 2 years. Everybody wants to get out. Everybody wants to bring our natural element in their lives, travel, see. Companies want to get back and start doing business. So Akasa shows up. And just when an Akasa shows up, you start seeing a Go Air getting weak, and like I said, Go Air is not self-inflicted like a SpiceJet. Go Air is because they're of a dependence on a fleet which they thought was very good, and unfortunately the engine started to break and fail. When you start having more and more fragmented, now I know where you're coming from. You're talking about a duopoly here. You're talking about
and I want to talk about duopoly in greater details. Yeah, yes.
I know you're going there, but when you start dividing and segregating, and this is yours, this is mine, we'll run it as two operators, what happens is that you tend to go to price cartelization. We've seen it in the case with IATA. IATA has focused on price cartelization since the 1950s. Where has that got IATA? If you do an analysis of IATA Airlines versus low-cost airlines, nearly all of IATA Airlines are in losses, whereas low-cost airlines give the consumer what you want. Eventually, it's a seat you're paying for, whether that's green, yellow, orange, blue, leather, made out of fabric. It's a seat from place A to place B. And it's who gives you that best option, whether it's on-time performance, whether it's a clean lab on board, a decent service, a good, reasonably fresh sandwich for breakfast, or just how the crew treat you.
It's also a sector where margins are extremely thin.
Absolutely.
And I think Shom can come in on that.
I think at this point of time, compared to the noises that the government is making at that point, this point of time, especially the minister coming on board and saying that the Indian carriers need to focus on international markets rather than on domestic markets. But from a policy side of view, I want to ask this to both of you. Don't you think it's a time for a one-time package, just like they did with banks? Because this is a sector which needs serious help, and until unless the government nudges the lenders to go soft on it, I think we'll be seeing hard times and turbulence like this. As Martin said, that a new airline has come up, and unfortunately that's been the story of the sector in the past decade, that a new airline comes up and two others go down, but that's not how you should be. I mean, if you are expecting the sector to drive economic growth.
So now the thing is that what I believe we kind of should also highlight is that there's a lot of employment which goes into play. If an airline goes down at this point of time, there'll be similar to what happened with SpiceJet. A lot of pilots started leaving. The packages which were given subsequently, a lot of pilots were unhappy with that.
And the unfortunate part with the jet was happened, the revival process, that has also stumbled. So the confidence around the sector, that has plummeted. So how do you address that from the government point of view?
I feel probably government would want to come in at this point of time, but they'll wait and see whether there's some bit of capital infusion. Like I mentioned, we are just at the initial stages of the insolvency process. There is a window at this point of time wherein there can be capital infusion, and they can of course take back their application. Alternatively, there can be restructuring of the debt also. I would suggest let's just wait and see for a month let's see, because considering the fact that government, I believe, would be extremely sensitive of people losing their jobs. You don't want that in this situation. So let's just wait and see for a month, and then I believe we can take it.
That's right. And if you the government has announced ECGLS for airlines.
Is that enough?
My personal view is that the government should not get into sort airline financials. That is an airline domain. If the government starts entering into business of running an airline, then you're going back to Indian Airlines or what you had 25, 30 years ago. The government ideally should act more as a facilitator. The government has no business to be in business, right? And that's what the mantra is of the Modi government. They've been focusing on giving freedom to industries and let them grow and let them liberate and balance themselves on their own merit. So, what is very crucial and critical, I think we're all moving to the same point, is that everything, the buck stops with the lessers, the operational creditors. It's how much of breathing space are they going to give a Go Air to keep them alive? With Go Air, we're talking about 8,000 directly employed jobs, 17,000 indirect jobs. I mean, that is, imagine 17,000 people multiplied by 32%, tax is the amount of money the government makes as well on salaries. So plus let's not talk GST and VAT start adding all the other wafers. So aviation is a rainmaker. There's no doubt about it. Should the government actually start writing a check to airlines and say, here's something to help you tide over? I don't think that's fair. My personal opinion is that's a commercial agreement between a lender and an airline. An airline is a commercial enterprise. It's not a PSU. And therefore, how I would like to sum it up is, at best, the government can act as a vital back-end machinery to help nudge a lot of global aviation aerospace companies who have an exposure in India. We're talking about Pratt & Whitney today, but not long ago, let's be honest, Boeing also had similar issues with the 787, right? So India has been at the receiving end of what's rightly being summed up by US, which is poor quality. Aircraft and engines and helicopters that break and keep breaking. Imagine you spent over $100 million for an aircraft, and guess what? It's not flying and it's not reliable. How on earth are you going to make money? You're not going to make money.
But it's not an India-specific issue, is it?
Correct.
It is a worldwide issue.
Yes. So what has happened is, and very valid you bring it up. 30 years ago, aviation was still exclusive for the luxury, for the elite. Today, aviation is a mandatory requirement. It's as simple as road infrastructure, metro, and taking a low-cost airline flight. When you mass air transport, you're also raising the quantum and volume of flying aircraft, the volume of the demand for aircraft. What was a 10,000 aircraft market today is a 60,000 aircraft market. So you want to manufacture an aircraft and sell it immediately, give it to the customer. So Boeing comes up with the 737 and the MAX. Airbus has the Neo. Everyone wants to capture that airline business, wants to keep its production lines going.
And let's not forget Air India's 470 aircraft deal, which brought in a lot of joy from the US, so much so that Joe Biden came on record to suggest that it's going to generate massive job opportunities in the US. And so it appears like both major aircraft makers are looking at India in a big way, even as many domestic players are sort of struggling at the moment. So brings us back to the question of sustainability, brings us back to the question of how do we keep them up and running.
Right.
And while with Go First there seems to be some sort of light at the end of tunnel, with SpiceJet they continue to maintain we have received credit from the government. That credit is enough. So much so that they have announced that the pilot's salary, which they haven't paid for intermittently perhaps in the last couple of months, they have hiked that salary as well. So do you see that they are going to be sustainable in the long run? Do you see both SpiceJet and Go First coming back, there's going to be more vibrancy, we'll have more players, we're going to be away from a duopoly, or do you see a duopoly in the near future?
I see a vibrant aviation environment where a Go First coming back. I see an Akasa reinforcing its position. I see an Ubarta Sitara like Star Air show up out of nowhere and start flying, and suddenly consumers and travelers are starting to notice.
But where do you get that confidence from?
Well, the fleet induction, they've got ERJ 175s now. They're very clear they want to induct at least 30 aircraft. So you know, sadly, India's a country where it's got a reputation where airlines go to die. But at the same time, from death comes new life. And I think where we are today in our airline business is we are starting to see new life.
Okay.
The key part of NCLT with Go Air is to keep Go Air alive. You know, Indigo is sadly a bottomless pit. You know, ECGLS, the credit, the money that they have, which is about 2,800 CR, well, that money is still our tax money. The government is giving taxpayer money to a private airline to keep it alive. And how, at some point, that's got to stop.
Okay.
Because eventually, is SpiceJet going to pay back the 2,800 crores they got in ECGLS back to the government? Are other airlines going to pay that money back? Whose money is that? That's our money. It's your
Taxpayers' money.
It's a taxpayer money. So I think the bigger concern is vibrancy is relevant. Vibrancy is key. You know, once you start going duopoly, we're going to see cartelization, price barriers, price agreements.
Do you see cartelization happening? Do you see?
It has happened in the past. If you go back in history to the 80s, we saw that in the case of Indian Airlines and Air India. I mean, the price of a Delhi Bombay ticket on Indian Airlines was locked, constant for 1 year. There was no hike as the way we see today. Today, the clarity is demand and supply. I can get a Delhi-Mumbai flight on a Saturday night departure for 3,000, but a Monday morning is going to cost me 18,000.
18,000.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's you got empty seats. Who wants to fly an empty seat? I'd much rather put somebody there and make some money. And I think that those pricing dynamics can only come in when you have vibrancy in our airline service offering.
Okay. You know, before I end this bulletin, and I want to sum it up with what we've discussed so far and also get your quick reaction on how do we see aviation sector panning out? What is the road ahead? Clearly, Mark, you are of the opinion that the more the better? The more players out there, better it is for consumers, better it is for, you know, for not just the aircraft, but not just for people who fly, but services that are connected to flyers, services that are connected to airline sector. And you are hopeful of the fact that there'll be more players, and you are, from what I understand, you say more and more players are going to come up. This is not a place where airlines should come and die. Rather, this is a place where airlines should come for a rebirth. Where do you draw that confidence from, and what is the framework that you're hoping government will adopt in terms of policy to keep the sector vibrant and robust?
India's got the youngest population in the world. India is the reason why India is one of the fastest growing economies is because a major part of that young population is less than 30 years old. You know, we're driven on a services and a consumer based economy. And when you have 1.4 billion people, and even if you have 20% of that as traveling public, we're looking at an opportunity that's exponential. It's not just a service that we're seeing at the moment with a low cost or a commercial. We will in times to come start seeing stronger seaplane operations. You know, we're sitting in a place like Noida, and nothing stops helicopter services to run from here to the airport or here to Jewar, which is the new Noida airport coming up, and also over to Gurgaon. So the possibilities are endless. And the good part about how we are in India is now finally we're starting to get fragmented. We're becoming purpose-built, specialized, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. Today, as a traveler, you have choices, and those choices come because it's centered on your propensity to pay and your ability to afford. And you know, if you want a business class ticket, you can get a business class ticket with all the bells and whistles. Or if you just want to go from place A to place B, you know what you're paying for. And I think that is critical. The Indian traveler, the average Indian, is discerning and he knows what he wants to pay for. And that, in my view, is going to lead to vibrancy as opposed to duopoly.
Okay, a discerning flyers in India, and perhaps they are going to ask for vibrancy. They're going to need vibrancy if they want to take to skies or continue taking to skies with ample facilities out there. Bharat, you know, we are at a time when more than 100 planes are grounded, and I'm quoting CAPA India report here. More than 100 planes of various Indian carriers are on ground due to various issues, supply chain, non-supply chain, which is approximately 15% of the total fleet. So we have a large battle to fight here. We have a battle to fight not just with, you know, engine makers, also with aircraft makers, and we are constantly fighting that battle. Indigo is hoping to get a better deal. Go First is hoping Pratt & Whitney is going to honor its commitment. As far as the legal side of it, the resolution side of it is concerned, for both SpiceJet and Go First, how do you see the resolution panning out? Will it be immediate? How long a period are you attesting to it?
So how I see it is that we are looking at least once it goes into resolution. I mean, once there are orders passed to that effect, I'm at least seeing say about 1 to 1.5 years, a minimum of that, for something to come through, for them to come through with total assets, and then kind of putting it on board, and then coming through with a discussion as to how it can be settled. Now, of course, the financial creditors would be the first ones who will be paid, operational creditors then after that, and then there will be a whole list of it. But be that as it may, I am saying considering how the sector is and considering the need for like flights and you want that much of infrastructure. So I personally do believe that a point in time when probably there will be some bit of capital infusion, as I mentioned, and you will see a lot of planes maybe flying again. You'll see a lot of these companies bouncing back, because investors would also want that at the end of the day, looking into the capex infusion and also looking into the amount of airports that are now being built. You need those airplanes. So long and short of it, I don't see airlines going down the way probably a Jet Airways did. But of course, it will take time. So I give it say about 1 to 2 years if it goes into insolvency.
For Go First and for SpiceJet?
Yes. No, I'm saying SpiceJet, we're looking at least like over and above at least an year. For both of them, in fact. Go First is at the initial stage. They've not even gone into moratorium. Once they go into that, then of course, then I see at least 1 year to that.
Okay.
SpiceJet, I see like a couple of years to that.
Couple of years for SpiceJet. Interesting. Shomalo, I'm going to end this bulletin, but you know, I just want to, and perhaps one last question, because you keep tracking aviation space, and there's so much happening all the time. It's buzzing with news here and there. Are you hopeful that the two airlines are going to come back?
I sincerely
because
hope.
you keep talking about aviation players that have gone down and vehemently.
I sincerely hope and pray that both SpiceJet and Go First, they return back to the skies as soon as possible, as simply because flyers need more choices.
Okay.
As Mark said, that it is a discerning choice. We have rising income levels of a middle class, and it's a big country. It needs more players. It's as simple as that. And I hope that somewhere down the line, the contracts with the engine makers, they also are more foolproof, so that we don't end up in a situation like
Interesting point about contracts. Absolutely, contracts need to be more and more foolproof. But I think with that, we've run out of our time. Mark, Bharat, Shomalo, thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining on that important story. We will, of course, keep bringing you updates from the world of business policy and economy.